is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. G20 leaders fly into Rome, their first face-to-face meeting since the pandemic.
Our other headlines, the storm across the English Channel. Now the UK warns it'll retaliate in the row with France over fishing.
Shifting up to electric, Volvo makes its stock market debut, one of Europe's largest this year.
Starting today, our company is now Meta.
Facebook changes its name. Is it enough to reboot a brand so damaged by a toxic social media world it helped to create?
And the most important lessons, the school in Spain teaching how to live a greener life.
Leaders from the world's richest economies have touched down in Rome ahead of this weekend's G20 summit. The conference will be the first face-to-face gathering since the pandemic, with COVID-19 and climate change top of the agenda. US President Joe Biden is among the arrivals, along with other world leaders who then head to Scotland for the United Nations COP26 climate conference.
Live now to Rome and our correspondent Hermione Kitson. Hermione, the joint health and finance ministers meeting underway. What can we expect from that?
Well, the G20 health and finance ministers say they want 70% of the world's population vaccinated against COVID-19 by the middle of next year, and they have convened a special task force to ensure better cooperation to boost supplies. Now, their meeting really foreshadows the meeting of leaders this weekend, the G20 summit in the convention centre behind me, because the three main themes will be the pandemic, the global economic recovery, and also climate change. Now, climate change is one of the pivotal areas of discussion because it comes ahead of the UN's COP26 summit in Glasgow next week. And the UN Secretary General says unless really clear commitments are made this weekend, next week may not be a success.
There is a serious risk that Glasgow will not deliver. Several recent climate announcements might leave the impression of a rosier picture. Unfortunately, this is an illusion. Even if recent pledges were clear and credible, and there are serious questions about some of them, we are still careening towards climate catastrophe.
Strong words from Antonio Guterres there, Hermione. Some tricky diplomatic meetings ahead as well. The leaders of France and the US meeting for the first time since this controversial new defence pact, AUKUS.
That's right. As you said, this afternoon, the US President Joe Biden met with the French President Emmanuel Macron, and this was the first time the two leaders came face-to-face after this AUKUS row in September. That, of course, being when Australia scrapped a plan with France in favour of another plan with the UK and also the US for nuclear-powered submarines. France then subsequently said that this move really was a stab in the back and did very significant damage to diplomatic ties between the two countries, or all of the countries involved. This afternoon, those two leaders met, and the leaders have just finished that meeting now. And the French President Emmanuel Macron spoke to reporters and said that they have committed to rebuilding trust, rebuilding their relationship, and they will keep working together on a range of important issues. So further details about their meeting is sure to come to light in the next few hours.
And China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has arrived there in Rome. What's on his agenda?
Well, actually, as we speak, Wang Yi is speaking with the Italian Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio, and trade talks, trade ties between those two countries are expected to take. Years ago, Italy was the first G7 country initiative, really boosting business opportunities. For example, this year, in the first 5 months of this year, Italy's exports to China increased by 75%, and that was the biggest growth market in Europe.
Hermione Kitson in Rome, thank you.
Well, before heading to Rome, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Albania, where he held talks with top officials there.
Yes, the two sides exchanged views on deepening ties across various fields, including the Belt and Road Initiative and pandemic response. Albania was the third stop of Wang's European trip, which also took him to Greece and Serbia.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and French President Emmanuel Macron will meet on the sidelines of the G20 summit this weekend. It's amid a dispute over fishing rights. On Thursday, France seized a British vessel accusing the UK of obstructing its fleets. Britain denies that and says it'll likely retaliate. We'll have more on the story later in this programme.
While President Joe Biden is in Rome, back at home, his entire domestic agenda hangs in the balance. His own party, the Democrats, can't agree on spending limits for two key pieces of legislation designed to boost crumbling infrastructure, tackle climate change and improve education and healthcare. CGTN's correspondent John Terrett is live in New York for us. So, John, what's going on?
Well, Paul and Jamie, all I can tell you is that those of us who live in New York and work at the Stock Exchange are very grateful that we don't work in Washington, D.C., because we simply couldn't take the pressure, because this just goes on and on and on. And here is the bare bones detail so our audience around the world can understand. There is on the table in the House of Representatives a $1.2 trillion bill. It was written by Republicans and the Democrats. It will pass eventually. It deals with basic infrastructure issues like roads and bridges and broadband. They can't vote on that, or he's already passed the Senate, you see, it's sitting in the House. They can't vote on that, or they won't vote on that, because progressives in the Democratic Party are very, very keen to get approval for a much bigger bill, which used to be a bill and is now a framework, in the Senate, which is really sort of human infrastructure. So we're kind of stuck. Okay, and I will just run through this for you. It was $3.5 trillion, all right? It's now been whittled down to $1.75 trillion. And this is what's in it, broadly speaking. Plenty of money for climate change issues to try and reverse that. Plenty of money for pre-K, which is basically nursery school. Plenty of money for childcare. No one will pay more than 7% if this goes through for childcare. And hearing as well is in there. But what is not in there, and this is what's upset the progressives in the Democratic Party, is key issues that they really care about, like paid leave for parents, for example, when their kids are sick or when they have another baby, free college education, and nothing now about dental or vision. So there is a real row going on between moderates in the party, two of them in particular in the Senate, who really don't want to spend even the lower $1.75 trillion, and progressives who really do want to spend much more. Now, what happened yesterday was Biden delayed his flight to Rome. He was meeting with the Pope this morning. We all saw that on CGTN. He delayed that flight. He arrived very late at night in Rome, and he spoke to his caucus on Capitol Hill, and the idea was that the progressives would say, OK, this trimmed-down framework, we're on board with it, let's go ahead and vote on the smaller bill in the House. Well, that didn't happen. And so Mr. Biden has had to go overseas, really, lacking a little bit of credibility, quite frankly, on the issues regarding climate change and some of the issues that will come up at the G20. The White House had very badly wanted to send him over with legislation actually on the books, or certainly well on the way to heading toward the books, and that did not happen. Paul and Jamie?
And so, John, what's going to happen next regarding infrastructure? I used to work there in the US with you, John, and action is really needed, isn't it?
Yes, I'm afraid it is. It absolutely is. In fact, Mr. Biden yesterday, when he gave a news conference after visiting his caucus up on Capitol Hill, actually said that there are 45,000 bridges in America that are desperately in need of some kind of repair work. 45,000, that's an awful lot. Well, look, they will get there eventually. They will do. I understand that what is presently this framework, trimmed down to $1.75 trillion, 90% of it has been written into a bill now, but 10% has not, and that's what they're wrangling over between moderates and progressives in the party. There are very, very real deep divisions, and I think that it is fair to say that this is a massive missed opportunity for the Democratic Party, both because they could have sent the president over with some ammunition that he now does not have in the way that I was just describing, and also because they're only at framework level with this bigger bill, and it could take weeks and days, I mean, no, days, weeks, months even, for it to be agreed within the party, which has very slim majorities in both the House and the Senate. Now, just very quickly, Paul, as you know, having lived here, big deadlines help to focus minds. Thanksgiving is coming up on the 25th this month, or next month in November, so that could probably help a little bit. But time is running out because there are 2 gubernatorial elections next week that will set the tone for the congressional elections that come up in November of next year. Campaigning for those starts on the 1st of January. So time is running out for them to get something really big done on the issue of basic infrastructure and human infrastructure. They know that as well. So we'll see what happens over the course of the next week and maybe even this weekend.
We will. An interesting Halloween. Thank you, John Terrett.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the powerhouse of the European economy, but Germany's growth disappoints the analysts.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Climate change is happening right now. World leaders prepare for vital talks that will change the course of humanity. Action could save millions of lives. Failure could cost many more. Do they have the will to act quickly? Does the planet have the time to wait? Follow full coverage from the COP26 climate talks here on CGTN.
Hi there, welcome back to Global Business Europe. A quick reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Volvo has made its stock market debut, and it's one of the biggest in Europe this year. Shares in the Swedish car maker, which is majority owned by China's Geely Group, rose by over 20% in its initial public offering in Stockholm. The company is now valued at more than $22 billion. Volvo is set to use the funds from the float to achieve its goal of being fully electric by the year 2030. Well, let's talk to David Bailey, Professor of Business Economics at the University of Birmingham. David, welcome back. Good to see you. The words excitement and Volvo rarely appeared in the same sentence in the old days. How significant is this successful IPO today?
No, you're right. They're very seen traditionally as very conservative, safe cars, aren't they? But they are very much these days at the forefront of traditional car makers pushing into the electric vehicle market. So I think it will be seen as a big success. It will bring in between $2.4 and $2.7 billion, which will help them in terms of developing new electric cars. They want to go fully electric by 2030. So I think it's a signal, actually, they're on their way. What's interesting, though, I think, is that this puts a valuation on Volvo of about a reasonably big player. Tiny partner, Polestar, which only made 100,000 cars, is likely to get the same valuation. So it shows the kind of dichotomy in the stock market about how the stock market market values traditional car players and pure play electric firms like Tesla and Polestar.
It's not first to the party on electric. I wonder what are the advantages and disadvantages of Volvo being slightly late to an increasingly crowded EV marketplace?
Yeah, that's a good point. They're not first to the market, but they are catching up very quickly. What I think they bring to this party is a long-established expertise in making cars, therefore good quality. And I think, you know, Tesla is hugely exciting, but its Achilles heel is quality. Volvo have also been developing a lot of autonomous technology as well, and they're hoping that at some point they'll be able to license the technologies that they're developing to other players. One of the other things I think is that the technologies they're developing can be shared with Geely and also Polestar, so they're able to get their costs down. So, you know, they're not at the forefront, as it were. They're playing catch up, but they've got some good qualities in terms of their design.
We had the boss of Jaguar Land Rover on the show yesterday talking about the new Range Rover launch, and all of these world car bosses shrug their shoulders when you talk about supply chain chaos and chronic chip shortages around the world. What's your view on the kind of disruption this is causing to companies like Volvo and the wider sector?
It's a big deal. So we're likely to see as many as 9.5 million fewer cars made this year simply because of the chip shortage. So it's a huge issue for the industry. Players right across the industry are having to react to that by scaling back output, in some cases going on to part-time working, restricting the number of models they produce and really prioritising those models with very high margins to get the most bang for their buck. In some cases, stripping out features to avoid using chips, including in one case, even going back to analog dials in cars rather than kind of computer screens, which I rather like, by the way. But it's a big issue. It will persist, I think, at least into the early or middle part of next year. And I think there's a broader question for the industry about whether car makers continue to buy stuff or make it themselves if it's strategically important. And I think we're seeing to see more car makers thinking about making chips, making batteries and making the key technologies that they need in the future.
Let's just come back to Volvo for a moment, and let me ask you what's changed at Volvo since the Chinese company Geely bought it from Ford 11 years ago. I mean, if you think back to even 10, 20 years ago, Volvo was a sort of safe, rather dull brand that didn't really excite anyone. They made thoroughly good cars, but they were really exciting. I mean, now it's a sexy car company, isn't it?
That's right. It was very unsexy before, but it always had a fantastic reputation for safety, and that's one of the things that has continued in terms of the development of autonomous technology. They've also got some very exciting designs in terms of them. You look at the models today; they're really good-looking cars, extremely well-reviewed, at the forefront of some of the new technologies that are coming. I think what has happened is that Geely effectively took over the firm, and they didn't mess it about too much. Previously, Ford would essentially say, right, here's our platform, put a Volvo on it. And that meant really a mass market platform with a Volvo body. Geely have left the management to get on with it, and they've given them a lot of room and flexibility. It's been extremely good owners. A lot of skepticism when Geely came in as to whether a Chinese firm could run essentially a premium car firm. They've done it very well. They've left the management to get on with it. And if essentially Volvo produce more cars now than Jaguar Land Rover off just 2 platforms. Jaguar Land Rover have maybe 4 or 5. So they've kept their costs down and they've developed exciting cars as well.
David, good to see you. Thanks very much for your time. Professor David Bailey from the University of Birmingham.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the French President Emmanuel Macron will meet on the sidelines of the G20 summit this weekend amid a dispute over fishing licences.
On Thursday, France seized a British vessel accusing the UK of obstructing its fleets. Britain denies that and says it will likely retaliate. Guy Henderson reports.
British fishing vessel the Cornelis Gert-Jan was still being flanked by French maritime police on Thursday evening, its crew accused of illegally fishing in French waters. Payback, says Paris, for a British failure to allow some French vessels to enter UK waters under the terms of last year's Brexit deal. Domestically, that stance is proving popular.
It's true that we are satisfied that there is an increase in pressure on the part of the French government and the maritime minister in particular, so that things can move faster and to accelerate the granting of those licences.
There's fury in London, though. Amid French warnings of further action next week, the British government has summoned the French ambassador, and on Friday morning, one minister warned two could play that game.
We've left the European Union, so they don't enjoy the privileges that they had to fish in our waters in quite the same way as they did when we were a member of the EU. So it is a change, but everybody understood that change, that we're becoming an independent coastal state again.
The dispute centres around a clause in last year's Brexit deal that allows some French boats continued access to British waters, but only if they can prove they'd fished them historically. Most licences have been granted, but about 200 apparently haven't. The island of Jersey's become a particular flashpoint, a British Crown dependency, but just a few miles off the French coast. It has bent to French pressure and allowed its boats in, albeit reluctantly.
Provide the logbooks, and if the logbooks show you fished in our waters, you are entitled to a licence. If there aren't logbooks, then it's very unlikely that those vessels have fished in our waters. And if those logbooks show that vessels haven't fished in our waters, they are equally not entitled to a licence.
Each side says the other's playing tricks over an issue that is on its own economically inconsequential, just a handful of ships. Politically, there's much at stake, though, and as the temperature rises, broader economic damage could follow. Guy Henderson, CGTN.
The Eurozone economy grew 2.2% in the third quarter of the year, according to the latest data. But inflation remains a major threat, surging to record levels on the back of rising energy prices and supply chain issues. Year on year, inflation was more than double the European Central Bank target. Our correspondent Ryan Thompson is live in Frankfurt for us. So, Ryan, how significant are these inflation numbers?
Hi there, Paul. These inflation report numbers are very significant because we're talking about levels that really haven't been seen in 1, 2, 3 decades, really since the early 90s. You said it there yourself. The year-on-year inflation recorded for the third quarter at 4.1%. This is more than double the European Central Bank target. They've said it for months now, even after a slight tweak, that they want to be at or around 2%, and this is just nowhere in that neighborhood. And of course, you look at the Eurozone economies that are really contributing to this high inflation rate. Take Germany, for example, Europe's largest economy. The newest data that we got just yesterday for that put inflation in Germany at 4.6%, which actually beat analysts' target. They had expected it to be a little bit lower, about 4.5%. Then if you look at an even smaller economy, somebody like Spain, 5.5%. These are significant numbers, and they're really being driven, as you said, by this energy crisis, but also by the supply chain squeeze, because either way you take the piece of the cake here, it is really pushing these prices up in terms of consumer price index and really having a knock-on effect in terms of the Eurozone inflation rate.
So you were talking about Germany just then. It did underperform in the third quarter. Why was that?
Well, the economist I was speaking to this morning said if you look at the German economy, it is growing, but it is just not growing enough, especially when you compare it to other Eurozone economies. So the third quarter GDP was at only 1.8%. That is peanuts compared to France, Austria, or even Portugal, where they are seeing 3% growth in their GDP. They are getting closer to recovering some of the GDP losses that they experienced as a result of the coronavirus. Germany is about 1% away from recovering that, so hopefully by the end of the fourth quarter or into the first quarter of 2022, that will be possible, but there is still a way to go here. Again, getting actually to that point will be made significantly more complicated by the supply chain squeeze, by this inflation question, and by the energy crisis, because we've seen prices rise more than 22% since the start of this year, the start of the calendar year, which of course has had a major knock-on effect on all aspects of the German economy and the entire Eurozone economy, everything from manufacturing to just basically heating your home at the end of the day. And of course, these numbers, taking a look at Austria, France, Spain, and of course Germany, this has had a huge effect on the new Eurozone GDP data which has risen 2.2%, beating analysts' expectations, but still not fully recuperating the losses that were suffered as a result of the pandemic.
Ryan, thanks so much. Ryan Thompson there.
The Chinese property developer Evergrande has made a last-minute interest payment to overseas bondholders. It helped the company avoid a catastrophic default for the second time in a week. With more than $300 billion in liabilities, Evergrande is the world's most indebted property developer. China's market regulator says the risks are under control.
David Bowie's estate is in talks to sell the late singer's songwriting catalogue, and it's attracting bids of around $200 million. The deal would span decades of albums, including Let's Dance, Heroes, and The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust. Musicians such as Bob Dylan, Stevie Nicks, and Neil Young have recently sold their catalogues for nine-figure sums.
Apple is blaming supply chain problems for lower than expected revenues in the fourth quarter, despite a 47% jump in iPhone sales. The tech giant says the global chip shortage knocked $6 billion off returns, with the outlook likely to worsen in the coming months. The result comes despite overall group revenue rising by almost a third. The world needs more truck drivers. 73% of all American goods are moved by trucks. Without them, the US economy would simply collapse.
But the country, like many others, is short of drivers. 80,000 drivers, to be precise, and it's starting to affect supplies. Nitsa Soledad Perez explains.
US ports are jammed, and one of the main reasons? A shortage of truck drivers in America. Though U.S. President Joe Biden ordered backlogged ports to work 24/7, there isn't enough manpower to move the cargo. The trucking industry is around 80,000 drivers short, a record high. And many of those still on the road are unhappy with the working conditions. Julio Cesar Perez knows. He's been a driver for the past 20 years. We met at a rest stop in Miami. His base is Houston, Texas.
The brokers do not want to pay for the load. They do not want to pay for a fair salary. The prices of gas keep going up. Look, I'm paying $1 more per gallon the last few weeks, especially up north. And you know, I'm talking about my experience. If they don't pay me, I'm just not going to work.
Down the road from the rest stop, a parking lot full of idle trucks.
Half of my fleet is on the road, and the other half is parked right here, where you can see it.
Why?
Because there is not enough drivers.
Why can't you find drivers?
Drivers, I mean, you can put the ad looking for drivers, but they are saying that we don't pay enough.
Dax owns 9 trucks. 4 of them are parked.
The revenue I'm losing is close to $25,000 per truck per month.
Wow.
So if you do the math times 4, that's $100,000 per month that I'm losing just in revenue. That's a lot. So all the other 5 trucks are working. They have to compensate the other trucks that are being here.
Most drivers I talk to say the low pay doesn't compensate for the unhealthy living conditions, 11-hour days, and lousy food at the rest stops. As they explain, they get to go home for only 1 week every month, making family life complicated. Dax is advertising a better work schedule and guaranteed mileage to attract job seekers.
We offer better compensation for the drivers, better quality of life. For example, I offer my drivers that they can go out for 2 weeks and come back for 1, so they can rest take 1 week with their families, just go out for 2 weeks.
But so far, no luck. The American Trucking Association says there are many factors at play. Drivers are failing the required drug test, and many are retiring. The group believes bringing in younger drivers could be a solution. Julio Cesar does not want his son to follow his footsteps.
Those of us that have kids, and I have one, he's 24 years old, I tell him, don't be a truck driver, ever. Because it's a very tough life. He speaks English, he can study something, become a professional, where he can earn an honorable salary.
As for Dax, a former banker, he's getting ready to go on the road since there are no quick fixes to fill job vacancies in a post-pandemic world where quality of life and fair pay are priorities. Nitsa Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, it's a dirty old business. So how is the global shipping industry cleaning up its emissions?
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
What does a sustainable future mean? What can we do with millions of tons of plastics, glass, food, clothes piling up on our planet? CGTN Europe looks at what consumers, businesses, and governments are doing to offer a better world to generations to come. Trash or Treasure on CGTN Europe and online at cgtn.com.
This week on Razor, in a COP26 special, we'll look at storing carbon dioxide by turning it into rock, and the dream of clean energy from nuclear fusion.
The main advantage is that no CO2 is produced through the fusion process, so fusion is the perfect energy to combat climate change.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories again. G20 world leaders arrive in Rome, their first face-to-face meeting since the pandemic.
The storm across the English Channel. The UK warns it'll retaliate in the row with France over fishing rights.
And Swedish carmaker Volvo makes its stock market debut, one of Europe's largest this year. Facebook is rebranding. It says it wants to focus on the so-called metaverse, a shared virtual environment. But critics say the move is an attempt to distract from the company's toxic controversies. Mark New reports from San Francisco.
At the virtual event Facebook Connect, CEO Mark Zuckerberg borrowed a line from the late Steve Jobs.
There's one more thing.
That thing? A new name.
I am proud to announce that starting today, our company is now Meta. Our mission remains the same. It's still about bringing people together.
Facebook and its family of apps like Instagram and WhatsApp will still keep their names. But Zuckerberg says his company has a new North Star to follow, the metaverse.
All right, perfect.
The metaverse is an immersive world that combines avatars with virtual and augmented experiences.
From a technical perspective, they're doing a lot of great work, and from how much better the avatars are today, much more realistic. It was, at the beginning, I was struggling to figure out if he was real or not in the presentation. He talked about using the metaverse for work, and so enhancing, if you like, collaboration.
The name change comes after some controversial weeks. Whistleblower and former product manager Frances Haugen released thousands of internal Facebook documents to Congress. The Facebook Papers, as they're known, highlights, among other issues, the social network's potential adverse impacts to the well-being of children and its questionable approach to handling misleading and inflammatory content.
You might believe in the vision, and I do to some extent. I think that some of the, ingredients, if you like, to that metaverse are going to happen and are going to change our lives for the better. But the concern of having a company like Facebook and a leader like Zuckerberg be the one deciding how this is going to be developing is concerning.
Zuckerberg did discuss the importance of privacy.
Privacy and safety need to be built into the metaverse from day one.
He also took a jab at competitors by talking about his commitment to keeping his company's ecosystem open for developers.
Living under their rules has profoundly shaped my views on the tech industry. Most of all, I've come to believe that the lack of choice and high fees are stifling innovation, stopping people from building new things, and holding back the entire internet economy.
Probably know that the only other company that they're going to be competing against, at least to start with, will be Apple. And so that idea of let's be open versus the closed Apple ecosystem.
Zuckerberg says he hopes within the next decade the metaverse will reach 1 billion people, support millions of jobs, and host hundreds of billions of dollars of digital commerce. Mark News, CGTN, San Francisco.
So has Facebook's rebrand come too late to save what many say is an already tarnished brand? Chris Stokel-Walker is a tech writer and journalist.
They've had a lot of issues over the last few weeks, Jamie. So they've had many investigations with whistleblowers alleging lots of impropriety. They've had hearings in the United States and in the UK where there's been huge issues raised about Facebook and the suite of apps that they have. So Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, and their potential impact on our society, our well-being, and our mental health. So this comes at a really interesting time for them to try and start afresh, because I think the Facebook brand, as we know it, has been a little bit tarnished.
So what can the company hope to achieve with this rename, this rebrand?
So there's several things that they want to do. Number one is that it helps them step away from the idea of Facebook as a kind of bit of a tarnished area. It also helps them reposition the company as something bigger than this one app. And so by renaming their parent company Meta, it kind of allows them to say that this is something distinct and different and better reflects the whole range of services that they provide. But then, of course, there is this big thing that Mark Zuckerberg wants to see as the future, which is the metaverse. And so the name Meta really deliberately ties in with that.
I'll come on to metaverse in just a moment. I just want to ask you about the business precedent around the world and what other companies have relaunched, renamed, made similar moves to Facebook, and how successful have they been?
Yeah, not hugely successful. The biggest one that I can point to is a company that we probably don't really know rebranded, and it is Google. In 2015, a little while ago, Google, as it was then, rebranded its parent company to Alphabet for largely similar reasons. It owned YouTube, the video sharing website, and a whole suite of other services, and it decided that it didn't want to say Google's YouTube, it wanted to say Alphabet's YouTube. Now, we've had 6 years since then, and frankly, I don't know about you, but I don't call Google Alphabet, I call Google Google. So I think potentially we'll still be calling Facebook Facebook, even if they want us to say Meta.
Okay, well, Facebook's future, they say, is metaverse. How much potential do you think Facebook's metaverse products could have, and what are the limitations ahead?
So one of the things that we have to bear in mind is this is not necessarily all new technology. Facebook bought a virtual reality goggles company called Oculus several years ago, which has already been developing the kind of technology that is key to the metaverse. And also this idea of an immersive world in which we all live and operate and work isn't new either. Back in 2003, there was a video game that essentially decided to try and become an entire universe in which we could live called Second Life. And several businesses were established that sold products in Second Life, but we don't talk about Second Life anymore, and because basically the idea didn't work. Now, there are differences between Second Life and 2003 computing and Facebook or Meta in 2021. The technology is much more advanced. There is an awful lot more money behind it. So there is the likelihood that if this is going to work, and it is a big if, Jamie, Facebook would be the ones to make it. But some of the challenges are that we don't necessarily trust Facebook. And so if we don't trust Facebook with our data for a social media platform, why would we necessarily trust it to run the universe in which we live?
Demonstrations are taking place in a number of countries ahead of next week's COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. Environmental activist Greta Thunberg is here in London to join a Fridays for Future protest. Later, activists will stage climate memorials outside banks and insurers with a candlelit vigil at the Bank of England.
And thousands of Israelis have marched in Tel Aviv in what the organisers say was the country's biggest climate protest. Demonstrators called for immediate action at COP26, with many saying time had run out for declarations. An Israeli government delegation will head to Glasgow in 2 days.
World leaders attending those climate talks will increase pressure on the shipping industry to decarbonise by 2050. The main mode of transport for global trade is ocean shipping. Around 90% of goods are carried by sea. Shipping currently accounts for nearly 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions due to its reliance on fossil fuels. The International Maritime Organization aims to reduce carbon emissions from shipping by at least 50% by 2050. Huge investment has gone into better hydrodynamics, more efficient engines and lower carbon fuels. Peter Jameson is a partner at Boston Consulting. I asked him about the importance of investment in making the shipping industry go green.
We see that around $2.4 trillion are required to make this transition to a zero carbon future. And therefore, the investment and to cover that $2.4 trillion is going to be absolutely critical to make what we all hope will happen a success. And of course, that $2.4 trillion doesn't just land on the desks of the shipping industry. It goes across the value chain from energy production to bunkering to actually on board the ship. So I would say it's absolutely critical for us to make this transition.
The shipping sector handles more than 80% of traded goods and uses around 5 million barrels of oil a day. In terms of fuel and actually getting ships from A to B, how do you decarbonise the actual vessels and what challenges are there with that?
So when we look at the solution that's going to decarbonise the shipping industry, there are a couple of fuel pathways that we believe in, and those are very much based on hydrogen. And then that hydrogen is then turned either into ammonia or methanol, as an example, that being a green solution. And therefore the challenges come not just in the production of that ammonia or methanol, but then how do you actually move that from those facilities to the ships? And then even on board the ships, what kind of engines do you need to actually propel these vessels around the world?
And Peter, the industry can't be seen in isolation, can it, to get to zero carbon? It's about all those industries that use ships to get their products all over the world. Are they driving the necessary change?
Yeah, absolutely. And here comes the challenge. We describe it as a chicken and egg or a supply-demand challenge. And what is really positive at the moment is the demand side. The shipping companies, the IKEAs, the H&Ms of the world are standing up and saying, we commit to shipping with decarbonised fuels and a decarbonised future. And now it's the time from the supply side to stand up and start committing on the infrastructure that is required to actually produce that methanol or ammonia and hydrogen that I mentioned earlier.
And you advise companies, don't you, on how to develop climate-related strategies. What can they do right now to invest smartly when there's still a lot of uncertainty about what governments are prepared to do to support such a transformation?
As you highlight there, it is at the moment in the hands of those big corporations that are investing in new technology for future ships. And there are some really smart things that these companies can actually do in investing in these vessels. And that is to, for example, invest in what we describe as dual fuel engines that allow you to switch between standard marine diesel or new future fuels. And by investing in these smart ways, they can actually manage that transition when those new fuels become available. So this is now about making smart moves. And then my second point, I think this is super important, is the efficiency topic. So how efficient can I actually drive my vessel around the world? That is something now that shipping companies can do to improve their emissions. And it will become even more critical as we move through this transition, because green fuels are going to be a scarcity to begin with. Therefore, the more efficient these vessels are, the less the amount of these new green fuels that they can use.
Well, countries in Africa are some of the least polluting on Earth, but some of the worst affected by climate change. It's an issue that's certain to be raised at COP26 next week. CGTN's Stephen Cole has been talking to Malawi's Minister of Forestry and Natural Resources, who says the summit is a crucial moment for Africa's future.
As a country, we know we are suffering extreme weather conditions. But we cannot just sit idle and lament. We have to find ways of making sure that we reduce the impact on the citizens of this country. So there is programs that are being developed. For instance, there is irrigation schemes that are being developed, water harvesting, landscape restoration. These are all programs that require financing. The processes required to access that financing are so cumbersome, it's almost prohibitive. So what we are asking from the developed countries is for them to stick by their commitments to ensure that the processes that are in place for least developed countries to access financing simplified.
And we've got much more on that interview in the agenda with Stephen Cole at 16:30 GMT on Saturday here on CGTN.
The classroom may be where students do most of their learning. However, architects in Spain have created an award-winning school, and the entire building is designed to teach kindness to the planet. Rahul Pathak reports.
Welcome to a school giving lessons, not just to its students, but teaching the world how to produce a place of learning that's completely self-sustainable, is 100% carbon neutral, and leads the way in innovative and creative education. Based in the north of Madrid, the fittingly named Brains International School has just been awarded Passive House certification, a voluntary standard awarded to buildings that show good energy efficiency and that have a minimal carbon footprint. So it's a very crisp autumnal morning here in Madrid, but I can tell you inside the school building itself it's very warm, it's very pleasant indeed. Now that heat is being produced partly by renewable energy, as you can see from these solar panels, but it's mainly down to the actual material being used for the school building itself, which retains the heat during the winter but also keeps the building cool during those hot Madrid summer months.
We have earth warming tubes buried all around the school. They transfer underground heat to warm the complex. And then we have trees planted around the school because in the autumn, when the leaves fall, they let through sunlight to warm the building in the winter. So the innovation lays in a combination of a variety of design ideas.
The award-winning building was officially opened in 2019 and forms part of an expansion of the Brains International complex. The original school building is used by the primary school students, but when they reach high school age, they move here. And for students like Viggo Gustafsson, the learning experience is markedly different.
It feels so much more fresh. There's more natural light. All the mornings when I got there, it's kind of dark, you know, especially in winter. You don't get that same feeling, that fresh feeling that you do here. Here, you feel the sun coming up from the morning. You always have a garden too. Yeah. I really like it.
By being a beacon of energy efficiency as well as innovative learning methods, the Brains International School is a shining example of how to educate students about sustainability through its design as well as through teaching in the classroom. And with more European Union funds being earmarked for similar energy-efficient building projects, expect more schools to follow the Brains International model in the future. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has visited Greece, part of a string of engagements before she leaves office. Merkel met the Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis in Athens, admitting to ups and downs in Europe's relationship with Greece after the financial crisis of 2008.
Sudan's military coup leader says he is trying to persuade the man he ousted, Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, to return and form a new government. Thousands of people have demonstrated against the military takeover, led by Armed Forces Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. At least 11 protesters have been killed in clashes with security forces.
Ecuador's largest indigenous group says it will temporarily suspend protests against rising fuel prices. This after President Guillermo Lasso offered to meet leaders. Demonstrators took to the streets this week, blocking highways as part of a nationwide strike in protest against Lasso's economic policies.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has told the head of the energy giant Gazprom to start pumping gas into European storage facilities, but only once Russia has filled its own stocks. That's expected to happen around November the 8th. Putin says this will help improve the energy market in the EU, where prices have rocketed.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Halloween in Hong Kong, the spooky festival that's back with a vengeance post-pandemic.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Hungary and Poland have announced new restrictions as COVID cases rapidly increase across Eastern Europe.
Governments are hesitant to lock down again, but doctors say something must be done with vaccine coverage and uptake not high enough to overcome a fourth wave of COVID. Penelope Lietch reports.
As autumn leaves fall, Hungary's COVID cases are only rising. They've doubled in the past week. Some experts are predicting another 6,000 deaths over the next few months. From the start of November, masks will be required on public transport. Vaccines will be mandatory for government workers, and private companies can also request vaccination for staff. But public health experts say restrictions have come in too late.
We need further measures like the compulsory mask wearing in public places, and hopefully with these measures and taking restriction seriously, which means those ones who are not vaccinated, they need certain limitation, unfortunately.
Employment lawyers believe putting the decision onto businesses to mandate vaccines won't necessarily bring higher immunity.
They firstly will try with a softer or gradual approach. So I think if it's possible to send employees to home office or to use any other option, then maybe they will try that one. And if it's not working or it's not possible because of the type of the work, then they probably will apply this law.
The hospitality sector is already struggling with staff numbers, but business owners say they do want public health measures to avoid another lockdown.
Our health is the most important thing. Another closure would put 70% of restaurants out of business. In a situation like this, we have to act, we have to do something to get back to the pre-pandemic levels, but we know that it will take years, if we can do it at all.
Poland is also introducing restrictions in its worst-hit areas. The Health Ministry had earlier warned the country could see 5,000 cases a day by the end of October. On Friday, there were more than 9,000. The rise of the fourth wave in Central and Eastern Europe is being blamed on vaccine hesitancy. Countries like Hungary and Poland have vaccinated more than 60% of their populations, but they're still a long way behind the EU's 75% average. Nearby Romania and Bulgaria have the lowest COVID vaccination coverage in the EU and are recording some of the highest death rates in the world. But restrictions and case numbers have led to an uptake in jabs. Back in Hungary, the government is insisting that a return to lockdown is not the answer, hoping vaccinations can catch up in time. Penelope Lietch, CGTN, Budapest.
As Halloween approaches, Hong Kong's Ocean Park is hosting its annual Spooky Festival following last year's closure due to the pandemic.
But instead of the traditional haunted house, visitors will get a different interactive experience. Anne Cheng reports.
The annual Halloween Fest is back at Hong Kong's Ocean Park after last year's pandemic hiatus. The park is celebrating its 20th anniversary, so instead of traditional haunted houses, this year's event is all about new experiences that are immersive and interactive. Let's check it out. For starters, visitors can opt for some mini games and win presents from these friendly ghouls. I'm in the Jack-o'-lantern's kingdom surrounded by pumpkins. More importantly, I get to go trick-or-treating for my fill of candy. Yes! Because what Halloween experience would be complete without it? And if you dare to venture further into the garden, an enormous 5-meter-tall Jack-o'-lantern king awaits. If that's not scary enough, wait till night falls, when the fear factor gets dialed up a notch. Stationed at some areas around the park are performers, including staff members, who go all out to play different characters and put on a show. This time, the theme is a wedding from the underworld. It's also an opportunity for people to take pictures or selfies with their ghoul of choice. And with elaborate costumes always a highlight, selected outfits worn in the past 2 decades from Halloween Fest are showcased here at the 20 Years of Horror exhibition. It's not just performers, though. It's typical to also see guests embody the Halloween spirit and dress up as their favorite characters.
I'm dressed up as Joker. I'm quite happy today as quite a few people have dressed up and they look great. So there's a Halloween vibe.
I'm the robot girl from Squid Game because this TV show has been a big hit. It's cute. Many people have asked to take pictures with me.
Meanwhile, several interactive missions are available for those seeking an even bigger thrill. From human organs to food from the underworld to ominous fortune-telling, each stall has its own unique characteristic inspired by the streets of Hong Kong. And of course, rides and games are still available for those who prefer the park's more conventional attractions. Chances are, though, during this period, there will probably be something lurking just around the corner. Anne Cheng, CGTN, Hong Kong.
Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take. All that and more at europe.cgtn.com.
Finally, archaeologists in the UK say they've unearthed a once-in-a-lifetime discovery of Roman artefacts.
The 2 complete sculptures of a man and a woman were uncovered during excavations for the new HS2 high-speed rail line, along with the head of a child.
They were found at the ruins of a Norman church, which was built in the year 1080 and abandoned 800 years later.
The headlines again. G20 world leaders gather in Rome ahead of their first face-to-face meetings since the pandemic.
A storm in the English Channel. Now the UK warns it will retaliate in a row with France over fishing rights.
And Facebook gets a new name, but critics say it won't rescue the social media giant's toxic reputation.
And that is Global Business Europe. Thank you very much for watching. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com and follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Preview.
Up next, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday from all the team in London. Goodbye.
Goodbye.